Here we go. So here we are, the basics of knowledge organization for personal knowledge management. This is kind of the overall agenda. So I'll begin with the introduction. I'll talk about who I am and my K for Data shirt. And then I'll talk about what this is and who you are and hopefully what you can learn from this. Then we'll do a little bit of a history tour through the entire history of Western civilization under 30 seconds. And then we'll talk about cats and logs and not chaining your books. And then I will recommend that you rob a library and museum blind. And then we'll talk about tags and hashtags and thoughts. So if that's not just intriguing enough, let's start with who I am. I'm Bri. I'm a settler, non-binary, queer, and disabled person living in Tsleil-Waututh, as I mentioned. I'm a PhD student at the University of British Columbia Information School. I study equitable cataloging from galleries, libraries, and PKMs, archives, and special collection. That's that GLAMS abbreviation there. Before this, I got a library degree at University of Indiana Bloomington, and I focused on digital humanities and metadata and organization of knowledge there. Before that, I did the history of the book and history of sexuality, and I published a book on the history of pornography, and I was on Conan O'Brien, and that was a lot of fun. But I still need a job, and so I'm back to grad school, and so brings us to the present day. I am going to kind of I thought maybe the best way of doing this was to start by saying what this presentation isn't. It isn't the final and ultimate solution to all of your problems with organizations and file. It isn't the end-all be-all answer to how to organize personal information management or how to organize your knowledge bases. It won't offer the perfect solution for your specific case, but you can pay me to do that. And if you would like to thank me for today, please donate to a local sex worker organization if you're able to. What this presentation is, like I said, a rapid fire history of organization and galleries, libraries, archives, museums, special collections, why they're like that, what we can learn from it. And then I'm going to give some broad concepts that you can adapt to your own system and the tools to think creatively about how to organize your own files, your own knowledge work, your own mission, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish with Obsidian or any other personal knowledge organization. Some of this presentation is based on a post I made in the Obsidian forum, in December. Cataloging, classification, information science, PKMs, and you. If you would like that, the link's right there. That is probably a rougher version and not as well thought out, but it is still, I think, a pretty good introduction to some of the things I'm talking about here. If, for example, if you do not have access to image descriptions, because I won't be going through and describing all the images, but all the images in that are described. So I'm going to take a sip of water. A very brief and very Western-centric history of knowledge organization begins in ancient Mesopotamia with tablets stacked on edge, side by side. These contents had like a little tile up front right on the side of the tablet would describe what the book was about, or the tablet was about in that case. You jump a few 2,000 years ahead in the future, you get scrolls, and you're in ancient Greece at this time, and Rome, and the Library of Alexandria. This was kind of the standard classification system for libraries in the ancient world. Very common in the Library of Alexandria, for example, and very common in the Roman world. These scrolls would have tags on them, or they would have an additional scroll that like prefaced all the work. And these scrolls would list what the internal contents of the book or the scroll was about. I know this is saying the word scrolls a lot. But the scrolls would list the author's name, who their father was, because that was a very important thing for understanding what the book would be about or what the work would be about. Biography of the author, a country, other works. Think of it as like the ancient Greek version of Wikipedia, except literally patriarchal. And of course, then you have the quote unquote fall of Rome and the quote unquote dark ages, which weren't very dark, but in terms of knowledge organization, perhaps you could argue they were, because libraries were they were organized haphazardly. So museums weren't really a concept. Special collections weren't the only kind of collections. Oops, somebody is unmuted. Oh, there we go. And this is a quote from a library historian. He said that libraries were organized according to the whims and knowledge of whoever was in charge. Very often that was the priest or the father or the reverend or the bishop or the pope, whoever was in charge. And by the way, there's a long-standing rumor that the Vatican Library has the world's largest collection of pornography, and it is not true. They have actually none, very, very little, what we might even call that. The world's largest is actually in Indiana, in Kinsey Institute. But anyways, that brings us up to right past the printing press. And even 8 years after the printing press was introduced, there were, I guess, intellectuals complaining that there was now too much to read. There's too much to know. Not everybody can't read everything that's left in the world now. And this is 8 years after. So like, people were struggling with how to organize information very, very quickly after the printing press enabled this wave of information. It kind of is a struggle for about 200 years. There is Gabriel Naudet's advice for establishing a library. He splits it into 7 categories: theology, medicine, law, history, philosophy, mathematics, and humanities. Not a bad system, I think, but it's really only meant for nobility who had the money to collect books. And his system was designed to make the books look very pretty on the shelves. So anybody that has ever organized your library by color, there is actually good standing in library history to do so. About the turn of the 1900s, you start seeing the really big national systems come into effect. And this is because it's actually reached a crisis point at this point. You'll notice that all of these really start in the United States, and that's because the United States had a lot of money and was investing a lot of money in library organization. After 1812, when the British invaded, well, I guess the Americans invaded the British first, and the British came over from Canada and burned down Washington, D.C. It burned down the entire Library of Congress at the time, who they went on to purchase Thomas Jefferson's library. So they were investing for the very first time. Was the biggest investment the federal government had ever taken, was buying Thomas Jefferson's library. So it all arrives in Washington. There's not really a system to sort it. So they start using Jefferson's system, which is kind of based on nowadays, but it's not really a great system. So about 1850, Melville Dewey, as in Dewey Decimal, comes along, and he's a terrible person. His system is still used in a lot of public libraries today. More of them are moving away from it. It is currently run by a corporation called OCLC, and they've done quite a bit of work in trying to improve the system. But very quickly, a lot of people start realizing that they need to develop better systems. To 2 that come out of Dewey Decimal for academic libraries and like larger national libraries are the Cutter Expansive classification, which becomes the Library of Congress classification, which is currently the widest and most popular library classification in the whole world. I have lots of thoughts about that I will not go into right now, but it's based off of Cutter's Expansive classification, which I will talk about a little bit later on, as I think that's a really good starting classification if you're looking for something like that. Finally, I think the best and the most fascinating for sure is the Universal Decimal Classification System that was invented by Paul Outlet and Henry Lafontaine. It's an analytico-synthetic faceted classification. And all that means is that with a string of numbers, you can query a database and say, I want books about firefighters who are white in Sweden, but only from the years 1923 to 1940. And that's what that string of numbers allows. And I'd be happy to talk more about that. But it's, I think, beyond what any of us will be able to accomplish in our own little systems. So that was the whole history of library systems. So with that, let's talk about the difference between cataloging and classification. The simplest version of this is that classification is where things go, and cataloging is what we call them. If you want to think about this in terms of the library, if you've been to a public library, or an academic library, you will, so if you've asked a librarian and have asked a librarian for where a book is, you'll notice probably that they'll say, okay, they'll close their eyes and they'll think, and they'll be like, okay, it's on the second floor, down 3 shelves to the right. And the reason they can do that is partially it's playing into the memory palace effect, where they can create this palace of books in their mind, but it's because it's classification. Classification builds off of that ability that humans have to remember where things were placed. If you've read through a physical book and you were trying to remember a particular quote, you can usually remember where on the page, or like roughly where in the book it was. That's what classification is really systematizing. And for libraries and museums, archives, all of these, it's basically where we put this thing on the shelf when it comes back or when it goes out, and if it gets lost, where it probably is. And if you want to think about that in terms of your own system, these are folders. These are really folders, and how you organize folders, how you sort them, why you have them or why you don't. And a good folder structure system is just as good as a really good library system, because you can visualize where in this tree of folders that you have the note that you're looking for, or the project or the PDF that you're looking for. Cataloging is what we call these things. So these are probably, if you're using data view, or if you're using some of the plugins that allow you to like tag, or even if you're just thinking of linking different ideas together. These are what you title your notes. These are how you organize your notes internally. It's not necessarily reflected on the outside. It's what's inside of the note, what the note is made up of. So cataloging, where things go. Cataloging, what we call them, classification, where things go. The reason I get into that so much, and I'm not going to dive too deeply into all of these, is up on top here, you have the 3 major kinds of classifications. You know, universal schemes like Dewey, Library of Congress classification, and universal decimal. Universal systems want to describe everything in the world, and they think they can. And it's useful if you have that kind of money and that kind of system. It's not so useful if you're looking to organize your own notes or your own system. Specific classification schemes, and there's national schemas too, and I'm not really going to dive into that one. That's really the Library of Sweden has their own national scheme, or the Kinsey Institute in Indiana, for example, has a special classification system for its books. But specific classification systems are really what we're concerned about here. And these are the bigger organizations, of course, British Catalog Museum, National Library of Medicine, Dickinson Classification. These are huge institutions, but special classification schemes are what we are interested in, and what your notes or your system reflects about you, really. And of those 3, of a specific classification system, there are 3 different types of cataloging systems. And this is, I think, what will help a lot of people who are looking to organize their actual notes within their Obsidian folder, within their Dendron folder or Logsec folder. You can either order things in a numerative way, in which you can go A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4. You can order things in a hierarchical way, and you might do this using data view, and I'll show you an example of that later on. Or you can organize them into, again, a faceted analytical synthetic way. That is probably much more what some of the more advanced data view templates and data view examples are doing. This would be, for example, sorting on, I'm thinking of one of the data views that was just like list of books somebody had read, and you could sort on, for example, the year the book was published. And also you want books by a certain author, or if you have a quote database, you can sort by the person who said the quote along with what year they said it. Those are the facets, and you're like trying to think through. That's the analytical part, and the synthetic is the blending of that. So you're blending the fields that exist, your own thoughts and the way it's structured, in order to create that sort of data view tablet. And this one is beyond me. I still have a lot to learn about data view, and I'll share an example of a note later on where I think I'm slowly moving towards data view, but I haven't really gotten a chance to get there. So just a summary, what can we learn from all of this? I think the first thing we can learn is nothing is perfect. There's no perfect system. And as much as I wish there were, because I love organizing things, there's not. Maybe if you haven't used hierarchy ever, try it just like a little bit, just as a treat, just to see if it helps you. And that's always to say, don't do something that's not going to work for you. If you try it and nothing's working for you, don't do it. Just continue on. If you have one big folder full of notes, do that. And that's better. And perhaps your system is better structured internally with tags and with other organization systems. But no matter what you do, don't reinvent the wheel. I've seen some people who come into the Discord or in the forums looking to reinvent an entire system of classification from the ground up, and it's admirable, and it sometimes results in really interesting things. But ultimately, it's a lot of work, a lot of stress, and a lot of time wasted, because the library systems have been doing this for centuries, and there's so much you can just learn from them, or just plain rip them off, reduce, reuse, recycle. Just base things on what have happened. This last thing there is tags, which I don't know. I use tags in the sense of like status updates, but a little bit later on, probably the last slide, I'll talk about how I use tags and ways I think that we could think collectively as a community about using tags and emojis particularly. Finally, this is moving into like the last third of the presentation. Go chain your books. This is a picture from the Norwegian Library, I think, in the United Kingdom. And this was pretty common. Books were chained to the shelves up until, gosh, probably past Queen Elizabeth's time, past Shakespeare's time, probably like, and I think still in some libraries, there are books that are still chained to the shelves, and so you can't go steal them. And this is kind of like a way of saying here, I'm trying to say, don't limit your system, try to experiment. So if you came here, look today, and you're looking for just like a really simple system that you can take away and implement today, use this. This is the Cutter classification system. It's free, it's available online. It's the Library of Congress system eventually became. It's a really useful way of just, oh gosh, how many sections do they have here? 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 sections here. And that's a really useful way. You can probably summarize just about everything you have in your notes into these categories. I might add a category for computer science, because that wasn't really a concern in 1872. I don't know if I would split up literature and fiction. I might combine the two, but play around with that sort of system if you're looking for something. On the flip side, if you're looking for the most advanced thing, go ahead. The Library of Congress system is out there. Please don't do this. It's 500,000 items, and they're all organized in a hierarchy that you could spend just forever on. The one thing that you could do with the Library of Congress classification system, if you were struggling to figure out a way to organize a particular folder, whether you not want it to be like the big folder or the little folder, you could go to the Library of Congress classification system. You can click into each one of these subject headings. I'll have an example a little bit later on, and they will tell you how they have organized it in their system. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Here is a picture from my own file system, and on the left, you can see here I'm in this folder. So where's that little laser pointer? Cool. So here is like my Obsidian folder, and this is my class and UBC stuff. So that's just straight Johnny Decimal, nothing fancy. And here is my Obsidian folder again, and this is my etc. section, and this is like society, philosophy, religion, and I'm using Cutter system here. Here's the reference, here's productivity, philosophy, historical sciences, society, language, and literature. So the one that we just saw here, pretty much basing it right off of this. And folders allow you to do that. Folders allow you to have different structures within different folders. You don't have to have the same structure all the way down. You can be like, no, this one particular folder, I'm going to do this other system because it's a much better fit for what I'm doing here. And like I said, here is an example of the Library of Congress subject headings. And here they classified pets. And this is a guide to how to read this. So the broader folder for pets would be domestic animals, and a related term or folder would be household animals. See also, not used as much, but you could use cats and dogs, and a narrower term would be like a Cocker Spaniel or African Bulldogs or so on. And this might be how you structure your notes, as I've done it here. It might be a way of you structuring your folders. It might be a way of you tagging things, might be a way of you relating things. One of my dream plugins would be that somebody could like tie in the Library of Congress subject headings, and I could just like, you could just like reference that, was linked to that automatically, and just apply that to all your notes. Get real close to linked data, and it'd be very cool. And what I've done here is in my own folder, I have a folder that's the 500s. I think I can just, here it is. Yeah, so with my 500 folder here, I just have this sort of thing. So these are all the notes I've made on top of my Zotero items. So these are the individual notes, and I'm building up on top of that. So I have a folder here that's qualitative research method. And I'm thinking that it might be best to turn this into data view. I still haven't figured that out yet. So if anybody wants to help me, that would be awesome. Tags. Yeah, I was very conflicted about tags, because for a very long time in library science, they kind of thought tags would be the solution, the answer for everything. There's a very long history of people being like, well, we can just have all of our readers tag things, and that will be really useful. And it is, it tells us a lot of things about readers, but if you've ever looked through Goodreads or I don't know, any kind of tagging system, and you've seen like 16 misspellings of the word philosophy, that also tells you what the downside of tags is, that they're not structured, they're not regular, they're not useful, and they get really hard to remember when you start having more than a few of them. So I think it's much better to think in terms of linking notes, because that you can have an authoritative note they can link to. And in a library, these things are called access points, and an access point might be, if you were a user in a library, you might be searching for Dan O'Neill, your favorite author, or you might be searching for the Firecracker Boys, that book that somebody recommended to you, or you might be looking about the history of the atomic bomb in Alaska. Any of those things that you enter into that search field is going to come up with those access points. And this right here is like one of those old school catalog cards, but any library system today you go to now is going to be structured like this. One of the things I kind of have here at the end is a way that we might think about using tags. And you can see here, I've taken Brian Jenk's system more or less of using emojis as tags. But one of the things I realized very early on is that, of course, emojis have meanings. They're not just like meaningless things that you, in order to have an emoji, you have to like write up a whole proposal and send it in Unicode, and you're going to have to accept it. And if you start digging into it, they have some really interesting meanings, and the emojis mean very different things. So for example, this first section here, I have non-research notes, and I'm basing it off like this pink color. And the highest form of the non-research known as the Hanamaru, which is the O mark, or basically how you get like a 100% on your paper in Japan. And that's kind of a way of thinking of like red, green, red, yellow, green. It's a way of thinking of like, I'm building on this first initial tulip to sakura to a high stylized blossom. And this is the other group of note that I have here, which are research notes, and I'm going off the yellow coating on the emojis. So a flower, a sunflower, and then a rosette, meaning like a very high-end military decoration. So again, like another award, like you've reached your evergreen note status. So I don't know, it could be an interesting way of thinking through how we might rethink tags as data view and other things start really replacing them, I think. That's all I have. And my goal was really to present everything up front and then to take some time to answer questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I will, I think I'm going to have to stop recording. That way people can